didn't realize how quiet the night had become until I checked the clock and saw it was 12:41 a.m. The entire apartment building felt like it had gone to sleep at the same time, leaving me as the only person still awake. I was 34 years old then, living alone in a second-floor apartment in a small town outside Portland. I worked late shifts and had gotten used to being awake when everyone else wasn't. Normally, I liked it. That night, it felt different. I had turned off most of the lights around midnight, leaving only a small lamp in the living room. The TV was on low volume, more for background noise than anything else. Outside, the street was completely dark. No cars, no footsteps, no distant laughter, just stillness, the kind that presses against your ears. I remember thinking how strange it was that not even my upstairs neighbor was moving around. He usually paced late at night. That night, nothing. Around 12:50, I muted the TV and went to the kitchen for water. As I stood at the sink, I noticed something that made me pause. The reflection in the dark window didn't look quite right. At first, I couldn't tell why. Then it hit me. The reflection showed movement behind me. Not inside my apartment, outside. I turned slowly and looked toward the front door. Nothing. Everything was normal, locked, quiet. I told myself it was just my imagination and finished my water. When I went back to the living room, my phone buzzed. A notification from my building's security app. Front entrance, motion detected. I frowned. It was late, too late for deliveries. I opened the feed. The lobby camera showed an empty entrance, no one inside. The doors were closed. I was about to close the app when I noticed something else. The timestamp jumped back by a few seconds and replayed automatically. This time, I saw it, a woman standing just outside the glass doors. She wasn't trying to come in, she wasn't knocking. She was standing perfectly still, facing the building, her head tilted slightly, as if listening. Her face wasn't clear, but I could tell she was looking straight toward the camera, toward the apartments above, toward me. The feed froze for a moment, then refreshed. The woman was gone. I set my phone down, my heart beating faster than it should have been. People stand outside buildings sometimes, waiting for rides, smoking. Still, something about the way she stood made my skin crawl. I checked the time again. 12:58 a.m. I decided to go to bed and forget about it. I locked my bedroom door, turned off the lamp, and lay there in the dark listening to the faint hum of the heater. At 1:07 a.m., my phone vibrated against the mattress. A text. Unknown number. You're still awake. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. I hadn't told anyone I was awake. I hadn't posted anything. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. The only other one awake. My heart started to race. I checked the hallway camera again. Nothing. The lobby feed was empty. I typed, "Wrong number." The reply came back slower this time. "No, everyone else is asleep." I sat up in bed, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound in the apartment. The heater clicked softly. Pipes shifted in the walls. I turned on the bedside lamp. My phone buzzed again. "You turned the light on." I froze. I hadn't moved the phone. I hadn't said anything out loud. I checked the app again, cycling through the cameras. When I opened the feed from my floor, my breath caught. The hallway was empty, but the door directly across from mine was open. Just a crack. I was sure it had been closed earlier. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. The door didn't move. It just stayed open, a thin black line cutting into the hallway light. My phone buzzed again. "You shouldn't have turned the light on." I reached over and turned it off, plunging the room back into darkness. I didn't know why I did it. Instinct, maybe. The text came again. "That's better." I slid out of bed and locked myself in the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I whispered, "Please stop." A few seconds passed. Then another message appeared. I didn't come to talk. Outside the bathroom, I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible, like a door opening slowly, somewhere in the apartment. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. The sound stopped. Then footsteps, inside, careful, controlled, moving toward the bathroom. And then I heard a whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside my head. "I know you're awake." The whisper felt too close to be coming from anywhere else in the apartment. It didn't echo. It didn't travel through the walls. It sounded like it was meant only for me. I pressed my back against the bathroom door and slid down until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, my knees pulled tight to my chest. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. Another message. You hear it too. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I listened, straining to hear any movement outside the bathroom. The apartment was silent again. No footsteps, no doors. Just the faint hum of the heater, cycling on and off. I told myself I had imagined the whisper, stress, fatigue, being awake too long when everyone else was asleep. But my phone buzzed again before I could fully convince myself. You're hiding. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I opened the camera app with shaking hands, hoping to see proof that no one was there. The hallway feed loaded slowly. The door across from mine was still open. The gap looked wider now, just enough to make the darkness inside feel intentional. I stared at it, barely breathing. Then, something moved inside that darkness. Not stepping out, just shifting, like someone standing right behind the door. My phone buzzed. Don't look too long. I dropped the phone onto the floor and squeezed my eyes shut. I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. I grabbed the edge of the bathtub and forced myself to stand. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. The bathroom door wasn't locked from the outside. If someone really was in my apartment, the only thing protecting me was silence and time. I unlocked my phone and dialed 911, pressing it to my ear as quietly as I could. The dispatcher answered, her voice calm, grounding. I whispered everything, texts, cameras, whispers, the open door across the hall. She told me officers were on the way, but warned me it might take a few minutes. Stay where you are, she said. Do not open the door. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I stayed on the line, listening to my own breathing, trying to keep it steady. Outside the bathroom, I heard movement again. Slow, controlled, footsteps. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They stopped directly outside the bathroom door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body trembling. The dispatcher asked if I could hear anything. I whispered yes. She told me to stay quiet. The footsteps shifted, like someone adjusting their stance. Then a voice spoke. Not a whisper this time. Calm. Familiar. You're awake, it said. I knew it. My phone buzzed again, even as the dispatcher listened. It's easier when you answer. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, tears streaming down my face. I told the dispatcher someone was inside my apartment. Her tone changed instantly. Officers are very close, she said. Stay exactly where you are. Outside the door, the person sighed softly, like they were disappointed. You don't have to be scared, they said. Everyone else is asleep. No one's going to hear you. The bathroom door handle moved, slowly, testing. My heart felt like it was going to burst. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to turn. It didn't. Instead, the person leaned closer. I could hear their breathing through the door. Slow, even, controlled. My phone buzzed again. You always hide here. The handle released. Footsteps moved away from the door. I stayed frozen, listening. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me to stay with her, to describe everything I heard. I whispered that the footsteps were moving toward the front door. Then, I heard something that made my stomach twist. The sound of my front door unlocking, the deadbolt sliding open. Then, silence. Seconds passed, then minutes. I didn't move until I heard sirens outside, faint at first, then growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the small bathroom window. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived and instructed me to open the door only when they identified themselves. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, my legs felt weak. The apartment was empty. The front door stood slightly ajar. The police searched the apartment thoroughly. No one was found. Nothing was taken. They checked the hallway and the stairwell. The door across from mine was closed now, locked. The officer told me that unit had been vacant for weeks. No current tenant. No scheduled visitors. He looked at me carefully and said, "Someone knew your routine, your lights, when you're awake." He paused. That's not random. I didn't stay there much longer. I broke my lease and moved in with a friend for a while. I changed my number. I disabled the camera app. I stopped staying up late. Still, some nights, when I'm awake after midnight, I get the feeling that I'm not the only one. Sometimes my phone lights up with a notification that disappears before I can read it. No message, no number, just a reminder. Everyone else may be asleep, but someone always knows when I'm awake. I had been living alone for less than 6 months when this happened. I was 31 years old, recently divorced, and renting a small single-story house on the outskirts of a quiet town in Arizona. It wasn't isolated, but it wasn't busy either. A few houses on the street, long driveways, no streetlights close enough to matter. At night, it got dark in a way that made you feel small. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I had trouble sleeping ever since the divorce, and some nights my mind just wouldn't slow down. Around 12:20 a.m., I was sitting on the couch with the TV on low volume, scrolling through my phone, trying to make myself tired enough to sleep. Outside, everything was still. No cars, no footsteps, not even wind. At 12:31, my phone rang. The sound made me jump. I hadn't gotten a phone call that late in months. I checked the screen. Unknown number. I let it ring until it stopped. Probably spam, I told myself. Or a wrong number. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same number. I frowned and declined the call. Immediately, my phone buzzed with a text. "Why won't you answer?" My stomach tightened. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who knows you're awake." That made my chest feel tight. I looked around the living room, suddenly aware of how quiet the house was. I hadn't told anyone I was awake. I hadn't posted anything. I typed back, "Wrong number." The response came slower this time. "No, I can see the TV light." My heart started pounding. I turned my head slowly toward the front window. The curtains were closed, but I knew light leaked out from the edges. I stood up and turned the TV off. The house fell into silence. Darkness pressed in from every direction. My phone buzzed again. That's better. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I walked to the front door and checked the lock, then checked the back door, then the windows. Everything was locked. I told myself I was safe inside. Still, my hands were shaking. I blocked the number and tried to breathe. Less than a minute later, my phone rang again. Different number. I didn't answer. A voicemail notification popped up almost immediately. Against my better judgment, I listened. There was no voice, just breathing. Slow, controlled, and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of my TV show, the same one I'd been watching minutes earlier. I dropped the phone onto the couch like it had burned me. My heart was racing now. I picked it back up and checked the timestamp. The voicemail had been recorded seconds ago. I hadn't been talking. I hadn't been making noise. Somehow, they were close enough to hear my TV, close enough to record it. My phone buzzed again. "Don't block the next one." I backed away from the couch, my pulse hammering in my ears. I typed, "Stop contacting me or I'm calling the police." The reply came after a pause. "You can try." I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, keeping my phone in front of me like it could protect me. As I passed the bathroom, I noticed something that made me stop cold. The window was open, just a crack. I was sure I had closed it earlier. I stood there, staring at it, my breath shallow. A text came in. "You forgot that window." I slammed it shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I didn't bother being quiet anymore. I didn't care if they heard me. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice shaking. A man laughed softly on the other end. Not amused, not angry, just satisfied. "You're home alone, aren't you?" he asked. I hung up and immediately dialed 911. As the line rang, my phone buzzed again with a text. "I don't like when you hang up." Before the dispatcher could answer, I heard it. A sound from outside. Footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, stopping just outside my front door. The dispatcher picked up. I whispered my address and told her someone was outside my house. She told me officers were on the way and asked me to stay on the line. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, my phone buzzed again. I'm closer now. Then, from the other side of the front door, I heard a man's voice speak clearly through the wood. "I know you're awake." The sound of his voice coming through the front door made my stomach drop. It wasn't muffled. It wasn't distant. It was clear enough that I could hear the shape of his words. "I know you're awake." I pressed my back against the bedroom door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled tight to my chest. The dispatcher's voice came through my phone, asking me to stay calm and describe what I could hear. I whispered that someone was outside, that he knew I was inside, that he had been calling me. Outside, I I heard movement, not frantic, not rushed. The crunch of gravel shifted slightly, like he was pacing just beyond the door. I pictured him standing there, phone in his hand, listening to my breathing through the wood. My phone buzzed again with a text, even though I was on the line with 911. "You don't have to hide." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears slipping down my face. The dispatcher asked if the door was locked. I whispered, yes. She told me officers were on their way, but it could take several minutes. "Stay exactly where you are," she said. "Do not open the door for anyone." The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. For a moment, I dared to hope he had left. Then I heard the doorknob turn. Slowly, carefully, testing. My heart slammed against my ribs. The handle stopped moving, and a soft laugh drifted through the door. "Locked," he said to himself. "Smart." My phone buzzed again. "She's smart." The plural sent a wave of cold through my chest. I asked the dispatcher if there could be more than one person. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she told me to listen carefully and keep talking to her. The man tried the handle again, harder this time. The door rattled in its frame. I could hear his breathing now, close enough that it felt like he was right outside my bedroom. "I just want to talk," he said, his tone changing. Less amused, more annoyed. "You've been ignoring me all night." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The dispatcher urged me to stay quiet. Then, abruptly, the handle stopped moving. I waited, barely breathing. Footsteps retreated from the door, crunching softly on gravel as he moved away. My shoulders sagged with relief, but it didn't last. I heard another sound, metal scraping against glass. My heart skipped. The back of the house, the sliding door to the patio. I whispered this to the dispatcher, my voice shaking. She told me to stay put. Officers were close. My phone buzzed again. Wrong door. I hugged my knees tighter, my whole body trembling. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Seconds stretched into minutes. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in my ears. Then I heard it. Sirens. Faint at first, then louder. Red and blue light flickered through the slats of my bedroom blinds. Outside, the sound of footsteps returned faster now, running. A car engine revved, tires spinning briefly on gravel before fading into the distance. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived and instructed me to stay inside until they knocked and identified themselves. When they did, I felt my legs give out. I opened the bedroom door and walked down the hallway in a daze, my phone still pressed to my ear. The officers searched the house carefully, checking every door and window. They found fresh scratches near the patio door lock, thin lines where someone had tried to force it. One officer shook his head. "This wasn't a prank," he said quietly. They took my phone and documented the messages and calls. Every number was different, disposable, burners, they told me. The voicemail with my TV audio made them exchange looks. "He was close," one of them said. "Very close." They asked if I recognized the voice. I didn't. They asked if I'd seen anyone suspicious lately. I told them no. The truth was, I hadn't been looking. That night, I stayed with a neighbor until morning. I didn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. The next day, I filed a report and stayed with a friend across town. The police followed up once, asking if I'd received more calls. I told them no. That was true at the time. I changed my number, added cameras, and started sleeping with lights on. For a while, it felt like it was over. Then, 3 weeks later, my new phone rang at 12:34 a.m. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A text came through seconds later. New number. Same routine. I felt sick. I blocked it immediately and called the police. But by the time they traced the number, it was disconnected. Again. After that, the messages came sporadically. Never threatening. Never explicit. Just reminders. Up late again. You still watch TV before bed. I stopped responding. I stopped leaving lights on. I changed my schedule. Eventually, the messages stopped. Or maybe I just learned how to disappear better. I moved out of that house within the year. New town, new routines. I don't stay up late anymore. I don't answer unknown calls. And every night, before I go to bed, I check every door, twice. Because the scariest part of that night wasn't the man outside my house. It was how much he already knew before he ever said a word. I was 36 when this happened, living alone in a small 2-bedroom house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood in northern Nevada. It wasn't remote, but it wasn't busy either. A handful of houses spread out along a curved road, each one separated by long driveways and patches of desert brush. At night, it got dark in a way that felt absolute. No streetlights, no storefronts, just houses and empty space between them. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I had worked a double shift and come home exhausted but wired, the kind of tired where your body wants sleep but your mind refuses to slow down. Around midnight, I turned off the living room lights and left only the hallway dark, moving through the house by memory. I liked it that way. Quiet, controlled, familiar. I was in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water when I noticed it, a faint glow on the wall near the sink. At first, I thought it was the moonlight shifting, but the glow was steady, artificial, yellowish. I frowned and turned my head toward the front of the house. The light was coming from the living room window. That didn't make sense. I hadn't turned any lights on. I stood there for a moment, glass in my hand, listening. The house was silent. No TV, no radio, no hum of electronics. I walked slowly toward the living room and peered through the curtain. Across the street, the house directly opposite mine had a light on. One single light, shining directly into my window. That house had been empty for months. I knew that for a fact because the owner was an older man who moved into assisted living the previous spring. The house had sat dark ever since. No cars, no visitors, no lights. Until now. I stared at it, my stomach tightening. The light wasn't moving. It wasn't flickering. It was just on. As if someone had walked in and flipped a switch without bothering to close the blinds. I stepped back from the window and checked the time. 12:47 a.m. I told myself it was probably someone checking on the property, a relative, a realtor. Still, something felt wrong. No car in the driveway, no sound. Just that light shining steadily into my living room. I decided to ignore it. I went to the bedroom and got into bed, turning off the lamp and letting the darkness settle around me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I rolled onto my side and glanced toward the bedroom window. The light was still on, brighter from this angle, direct. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. A text from an unknown number. You noticed it. My heart started pounding. I stared at the message, my fingers cold. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "Your neighbor, across the street." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I hadn't told anyone I noticed the light. I hadn't messaged anyone. I typed, "That house is empty." The reply took a few seconds longer this time. "Not tonight." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I checked the window again. The light was still on. I slid out of bed and quietly walked back to the living room, keeping to the shadows. I peeked through the curtain again. The light was now closer to the front of the house, as if someone had moved into a different room. Still no car, still no movement visible. My phone buzzed again. "You don't have to stand there." I backed away from the window, my heart racing. I whispered, "This isn't funny," even though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Another message appeared. "I'm not trying to be funny." I locked my front door, then checked the back door. Locked, windows secure. I told myself I was safe inside. Still, I felt exposed. I turned off the bedroom light completely and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the glow from across the street spill faintly into my room. At 1:06 a.m., my phone buzzed again. "You usually sleep by now." That was when the fear really set in. They knew my routine, not just where I lived, but how I lived. I typed back, "Stop texting me." The response came after a pause. "I just wanted to make sure you were alone." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor, my back against the tub, phone clutched in my hand. I could hear my own heartbeat. Outside, everything stayed quiet. No footsteps. No doors. Just silence and that light. Minutes passed. Then my phone buzzed again. "You don't need to hide." I held my breath and listened. From somewhere outside, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. Gravel crunching. Slow footsteps. Not from across the street. From my driveway. The light across the street turned off. My phone buzzed one last time. "I'm coming over." And then I heard a knock at my front door. The knock came again, louder this time. Not frantic, not aggressive, just firm enough to let me know it wasn't a mistake. I stayed frozen on the bathroom floor, my phone clutched in my hand, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might give me away. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I listened. Outside the door, someone shifted their weight. I could hear the faint scrape of shoes on concrete. Then a voice spoke, calm and unhurried. "I know you're awake," it said. It wasn't raised. It wasn't threatening. That somehow made it worse. My phone buzzed, lighting up the dark bathroom. "You don't have to be scared." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I hadn't responded to any of the messages, but they kept coming, as if my silence was part of the conversation. Another knock followed, slower, more deliberate. "You left your kitchen light on earlier," the voice said through the door. "I thought you might need help." My stomach twisted. I hadn't left any lights on. I was sure of it. I crawled quietly to the bathroom door and pressed my ear against it. The house was otherwise silent. No cars, no neighbors, just the person on the other side of my front door, waiting. I opened my phone and checked the camera app I'd installed months earlier and rarely used. The front porch feed loaded slowly. When it finally appeared, my breath caught. A man stood just outside the door, close enough that the camera only caught part of him. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his shoulders and the brim of a hat pulled low. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't looking around. He was facing the door directly, like he knew exactly where I was standing inside. The timestamp showed 1:14 My phone buzzed again. I turned the light off so no one would see. I felt sick. The light across the street. That was him. Or them. I didn't know how many people were involved, and that uncertainty pressed down on me like weight. I whispered to myself, "Don't answer," over and over. Outside, the man sighed softly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. The handle on the door moved slightly, testing. My heart lurched. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers and put the phone to my ear, keeping my voice as low as possible. The dispatcher answered, her voice steady. I told her everything in broken whispers, the light, the messages, the man at my door. She told me officers were on the way and to stay where I was. "Do not open the door," she said firmly. I nodded, tears spilling down my face. Outside, the man stopped touching the handle. Silence stretched. For a moment I thought maybe he'd leave. Then my phone buzzed again. "You called someone." I stared at the message in disbelief. There was no way he could know that, unless he could hear me, unless he was closer than I realized. The dispatcher asked if the person was still there. I whispered yes. She told me officers were close, just a few minutes out. The man knocked again, once, harder. "They won't get here in time," he said, his voice still calm. "They never do." My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I backed farther into the bathroom and locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted in. Outside, I heard footsteps moving away from the front door. Relief washed over me, too fast, too easy. Then I heard another sound, gravel crunching. From the side of the house, the backyard. My phone buzzed. Wrong door earlier. I felt like I was going to throw up. I whispered this to the dispatcher, my voice cracking. She told me to stay put, that officers were seconds away. I listened desperately for sirens. Outside, the footsteps moved along the side of the house, slow and unhurried. Then they stopped. I heard the faint click of metal against metal, someone testing the back door handle. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body shaking. I thought about the empty house across the street, about how long that light had been on before I noticed, about how long someone might have been watching me before tonight. My phone buzzed one last time. "You shouldn't have been alone." And then, finally, I heard it. Sirens, loud and unmistakable. Red and blue light flashed through the small bathroom window. Outside, hurried footsteps retreated across gravel. A car engine started somewhere nearby, revved, then faded into the distance. The dispatcher told me to stay inside until officers knocked and identified themselves. When I opened the bathroom door, my legs felt weak. I crept down the hallway, my heart still racing, and waited by the front door. The knock this time was different. Firm, authoritative. "Police," a voice called. I unlocked the door and collapsed into tears as two officers stepped inside. They searched the house and the yard. They checked the back door and found fresh marks near the handle, thin scratches where someone had tried to force it. Across the street, the empty house was still dark. No lights, no movement. The officers asked if I recognized the man. I shook my head. They asked if I had enemies, exes, anyone who might do this. I couldn't think of anyone. One officer looked at me carefully and said, "This wasn't random. Someone knew you lived alone." I didn't stay in that house much longer. I moved closer to town, closer to people. I changed my number and my routine. Still, some nights, when I'm awake after midnight, I think about that light across the street, about how easily someone could make their presence known without ever stepping inside. I keep my curtains closed now. I don't leave lights on, and every time I see a house that's been dark for too long suddenly light up at night, I feel my chest tighten, because I know now that sometimes the scariest thing isn't someone breaking in. It's someone letting you know they've been there all along.